Getting insights about your users is very hard. You do surveys, you do user interviews or whatever, and you need to pay a lot of money and it takes a lot of time. You can also see how they react to your competitors' products, right? I think that's what's unique about on-chain data. And not just, recent data, you have like years and years of historical data to make trends out of.
What's the misconception that is kind of like holding them back from really understanding that social data is nice, but when it comes to Web3 and crypto products, on-chain data could be an incredible resource.
Maybe they just don't see the extent you can do with it. Maybe there are no public analysts that are like public analysis that are helpful. If brands don't have an open rule for it, doesn't mean you just give up. Like, that's the opportunity right there.
When we look at Web3, and I put out a tweet a couple of, I think yesterday, my tweet was like, I was kind of like talking about retention, and I was saying that the topic of user retention in Web3 is very funny, because when you look at it, Web3 protocols tend to have some of the most rich access to data, and retention is very retention and churn rate particularly is very high in Web3. That also sets the case for brands and protocols within crypto and within Web3. Usually there's such a elaborate access and availability of on-chain data that their users leave, like timestamps of user activity on chain, but not many brands prioritize data analysis or prioritize the need to understand these data on whatever chain they're on. And it's kind of like sets the question up in a sense that what's the most compelling reason why brands in Web3 should prioritize on-chain data right now for not just marketing purposes, but then also for products as well?
I feel like maybe it's just a matter of time. As the space become more competitive, the need for attracting users become, it will become harder to attract more users. Maybe that's when data will be taken more seriously. But if you think about it, like in getting insights about your users is very hard. You do surveys, you do user interviews or whatever, and you need to pay a lot of money and it takes a lot of time.
Yeah, true.
So I feel like to a certain extent, maybe the industry takes it for granted that all this data is public. And the other benefit of Web3 data or on-chain data is that not only you can see how users react to your product via the data, but you can also see how they react to your competitors' products, right? I think that's what's unique about on-chain data. You can just sort of map activities of and behaviors of the addresses that interact with your protocol. And not just, recent data, you have like years and years of historical data to make trends out of, right? So many lessons to learn in there.
Yeah, awesome. I think I agree with you, particularly with the idea when you mentioned that maybe brands take it for granted and maybe we need more time in the space. But if they take it for granted, it might be down to a misconception, like, or maybe misunderstanding, or because at the end of the day, you notice marketers overemphasize on data. I don't know, from a marketing angle, I don't any serious growth marketer or marketer generally speaking, or someone who is into sales or marketing really understands the importance of data. In my experience, I found that many times the obsession is with vanity metrics like clicks, Twitter followings, product signups, those kinds of things, those generic Web 2-ish data metrics. So when you look at it from that perspective, what is I think is not a case where many brands don't understand data, because there was a time when if you remember, in the space where having like a massive Twitter following was a big flex for VC funding or getting into Binance or having massive numbers of activities in your products. And those are kind of like vanity metrics based on your experience. People still, they understand this data, but then they tend to play towards the social side of things. What's the misconception that is kind of like holding them back from really understanding that social data is nice, but when it comes to Web3 and crypto products, on-chain data could be an incredible resource for them to actually scale growth?
I'm not too sure, to be honest. Maybe they just don't see the extent you can do with it. Maybe there are no public analysts that are like public analysis that are helpful. So that's why they don't, put piece and piece that put the things together and see how it can be useful for their brand. Yeah, not really sure.
Yeah, same here. Because it's for me, I and Joel talked about it quite a number of times. It's kind of like a big issue. It's kind of like a big gap between awareness level, and which I agree with you on that.
Mm.
But when someone like me watch and go through your tweets a whole lot, you kind of like seeing there are many ways and many touch points to which we can approach data. And when I talk to teams and I talk to people in the space, the idea of data getting misunderstood is one, but like you said, it's that awareness level to which maybe they've not been enough data analysts to show how data works. But I find that difficult when you look at the amount of videos you've put on YouTube.
Yeah, I mean YouTube is one thing. Actually, watching it through and doing it is another.
Yeah, that's true.
It's
True.
probably like 1% or less than 1%.
Mm,
But I don't know. I feel like that maybe the incentives are not there
yeah.
for people to do that sort of analysis.
Mm,
And I feel like that's a shame because yeah, there's just so much you can do.
yeah. Let's talk about that. When you say there's so much we can do, when I look at data, I mean, I'm a proud student of SAM, to be honest. When you look at data, but especially when you've been able to actually decode the data, you see the like tons and tons of events that you can actually play with. And when you look at it from a macro, that's from a macro perspective. But when from a macro perspective, you can look at the different angles to which brands can actually approach this, marketers can actually approach this, even data analysts themselves. But what are some of the like when you look at analytical frameworks or frameworks that you've personally used when creating dashboards? So in that kind of sense, what are some of the frameworks that brands can actually implement to actually get data for better audience targeting or better ways to understand their user activities, better ways to actually create the frameworks they can use to actually build dashboards that are of value to them, that actually align with certain incentives, like you mentioned, or for on-chain analysis themselves, are the frameworks that analysts can use to actually build better models and dashboards that drive real impact? Because some of the dashboards we see on X are really not that good, but some of them are really, really good. But are there really like baseline frameworks that people can actually use depending on who they are, whether a brand or a marketer or an analyst?
Yeah, I think broadly speaking, from my perspective, you can try out two framework. So the
Mhm.
first one being I want to say like event specific. So let's say your protocol just did an event. A common event could be a liquidity event, like
Mhm.
for during X period of time, you're incentivizing this amount of pool liquidity pools, right? And then that event could tell you a lot about how your users behave or like, what the users do on your platform. Like for example, how effective is it? How effective is the program?
Yeah.
Things like that, right? Who stays, how many churn, and so framing your analysis with the event in mind instead of like a generic analysis of
Mhm.
the protocol, I think that by itself already gives some value
Yeah.
to the protocol, right? The other framework that I've is actually my pinned tweet on X.
Hmm.
It's tying a persona to an actionable or to an action question.
Hmm.
So this is very similar to the event framework that I just mentioned. But one example here is let's say your persona is new NFT users, right? And so the
Yeah.
goal of the platform, maybe you want to look at how new NFT users sort of use your platform. And so that's your persona, new NFT users. How do you define new NFT users, right? It could be addresses that bought their first NFT uh, above a certain threshold, right? On what period of time. So that could
Hmm.
be your persona. That's how you measure it. And then what is the action? So maybe let's say there's an onboarding process in your NFT platform where you sort of guide users through buying an NFT, right?
Yeah.
And so you can look through those actions, like how much
Yeah.
they spend, what's their first purchase, and then come up with an insight. And for example, an insight here would be if you see that most users spend less than
Hmm.
$100 or whatever, then maybe you can use that to optimize your onboarding
Process.
experience. So maybe you somehow show collections that are below 100 or like this sort of things. But the main point here is that there is a persona and there's an action, and usually if you tie the two together, it leads to an actionable insight.
Incredible. Yeah, events and personas. Yeah, the event, by the way, is one of my interesting favorite frameworks. I like using events a lot because it gives a whole lot of insights. And then I also believe it's very possible to tie both of them, tie both of those frameworks together, right? In a single
Yeah,
dashboard. Yeah, incredible,
yeah,
incredible. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I guess the event thing is like if the protocol did some special program or event,
Mhm.
and then the other framework being you just want to research what's out there. And so it could be there's no event and you want to see like what, like in this case I was talking about with the new entity users, finding out what do they do on the platform.
Interesting, interesting. I think I agree with that, particularly because understanding acquisition and then maybe adding a bit of cohort analysis there to see how much, okay, what's the acquisition rate and how long do brands retain them. Using a month by month cohort analysis would be really interesting. So yes, I think it's I think that that works a whole lot. And I have to agree because the amount of insight that brands can be able to actually get from that is incredible. And then with a bit of competitor analysis, you can begin to say, okay, and what did they do next? Do they
Mm.
sell a product here and go to the next competitor, or do they buy NFT is their next action, adding the liquidity on another chain? There's a whole long list that brands can be to play about based on what you just said.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I don't see any of those analysis
So,
on
yeah.
my X. So a lot of opportunities if you ask me.
Yeah, it's again it ties back to what we initially said, man. There's so much that brands can do, but just not enough action or maybe insight or awareness to what's really possible with data. So yeah, it's kind of like a challenge in my opinion. So and I explained that what I meant by that is I think last month or so, on the 29th, I guess. I was on X and I saw a tweet from Jonda. Jonda is a data analyst as well. He makes a lot of dashboards on Dune, by the way. And he was like paraphrasing him now, by the way. It was like as a data analyst, I think he was talking from his own perspective, his own POV, that he's like kind of like concerned with the state of crypto or Web3, kind of like in that kind of sense. That he's been checking JobsBoard and for blockchain data analysis roles, blah 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 blah, and no one is really hiring data analysts or data scientists. But majority of products or projects, by the way, have like lots and lots of open positions for marketing and business development, SEO, content marketing specialists, those kinds of marketing related roles. And he's like he understands the importance of reaching or acquiring users. But when teams are investing in marketing and almost no and they're not bothered about making conscious decisions based on data or conscious decisions that is driven by data, it's kind of like a big red flag to him. And it's like he used the word irony. It's like it's ironic in a case that it's an industry, again back to what you initially said, with the most open and transparent data, but no one is kind of like interested in what it sounds or in the value that kind of brings from there. And the response to that tweet was quite interesting. Quite a number of people actually talked centered around what he said. In that kind of context, is that something you've also noticed when you look at where data is right now in the space and the kind of interest brands have to data when they're looking for opening positions for hiring in that kind of sense?
I feel like if you're an analyst, generally there are less data analyst positions, but the opportunity here is then you're able to pitch or you're able to do like work for multiple brands. And so I think there are a lot of analysts that are behind the scenes working for different protocols,
Mhm.
not as a formal position, but providing whether it be dashboarding services or like
Yeah,
data services. But that's the thing, right? Like even if brands don't have an open rule for it, doesn't mean you just give up. Like that's the opportunity right there, right? It's Web3, you can just show up, provide value, and then people will take notice. And maybe that's how people will notice that data can be an important thing that they need for their or even marketing.
that's nice. That's a very interesting way to look at it. Very interesting. I have to agree with that. It's quite an interesting angle, being able to actually pitch yourself. By the way, based on the fact that the data is open, you can as well just create dashboards and maybe make case studies on what's possible and pitch with that. It changes the idea from being like a full-time employee to like a contract basis, based on what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, there are just too many protocols, and because of that, um, there's a lot of clients you can pitch to.
Yeah, that's true. I have to agree with that. I have to agree with that. Let's talk about something that it's a big question. Knowing that first this conversation around why data is important and whatnot, it's a big it's a concern. But from a data analysis part of view, I personally listened to your the space you had in with Metric DAO in 2022. I had to fish it out and listen to it. We did listen to it, the team listened to it while preparing for this podcast. And
Oh wow.
yeah, we did. And that's what that we got the part when you mentioned that you had to learn SQL from scratch, and then you took part in a Flipside bounty program back then, and it kind of like clicked. Like I remember it was one of the private classes you and Joel had, and you mentioned that your background is in psychology and UX for about 5 years before moving into crypto, and like it's kind of like when the majority of the case for many data analysts in the space. We have different backgrounds where we come into crypto and we're like, yeah, data could be nice. Let's learn a bit of SQL, snowflakes here and there. But when you look at back when you look at your journey to where you are currently right now, working with Flipside, what's the one thing that you wish someone had told you when you were first starting in on-chain data that would have maybe most likely saved you a lot of headaches and a lot of stress while learning or just trying to understand how the entire, because it can be very daunting, it can be very confusing.
Yeah. Crazy times with the bounty. Let's see. So I think for SQL, I think the misconception there might be like needing to know everything about SQL.
Yeah, yeah.
In reality, you probably just need to know a handful of functions. You just need to know the basic syntax, and you're ready to go, right? You'll be able to start querying right away.
Yeah.
So you don't need to feel like you have to take every course about SQL. Back then, there was no AI. So it's so much easier now to learn and get started, right? I think that's the most important thing, is getting started. And then the other thing I want to say about tables, right? Whether it's due on the flip side, I think it's important to first deeply understand the data in the table itself instead of jumping straight into uh doing like, summing something out, counting something. I think it's very important to first look at the examples in the table itself. Like, do a select star, see what are the sample transactions that show up, see what columns uh tie back to what you can see on the Explorer, and just sort of have a feel of what the table is. I see a lot of people when starting out, they want to jump straight into a table and then um do like a some amount of token swap or amount of NFTs bought, right? And then they sort of just stop there. That's because they don't really understand the table and what analysis they can get out of the table, which can only happen if you truly, do a select star, see through the tables, see what you can find. That's when you know like what you can do with the table.
I think that would have been a very good advice when I started. I remember yeah, it's over 1 year when and we kind of like moved into from Web 2 data to Web 3 data, and first found out about Dune. It was very daunting to understand. Very different from it's a very different experience coming from Web 2 background with Tableau, right? And then you come into Dune where it's not drag and drop. It's you literally have to write query. And then we found Flipside, and we're like, okay, let's Flipside had nice thingies, like lots of examples. On my timeline, then lots of people were just writing queries, and then I think my first query was on base, to be honest.
Mm,
Now,
okay.
I think a couple of weeks ago, I told Joel I want to go and delete those queries. I'm embarrassed. Oh my god! I think the only reason why I've not deleted them, yeah, it just kind of reminds me like the journey, the growth process.
Yeah, yeah.
And I really agree that I fell into that trap where we just that table part where we just took the data and we just particularly me writing the query based on what I had in mind, not based on what the table had to offer. And at that period it was very tough, I have to be honest. And I think I agree with you because it kind of like limits what you can actually put out. And by the time someone else takes on that same protocol and writes makes a dashboard, you'll be like, is it the same table I worked with? Like so yeah, yeah, I think my experience actually really resonates with that. I think many people who are into data right now, starting out data or had started out data, might have experienced that. I mean, thank you so much for that, bro.
Yeah, to your point on deleting the queries, I mean, I think it happens to everyone. Like, if I
Yeah,
look at my old queries now, I'll be like, what was I even writing? But that just means you've gotten better, right? You've
yeah,
progressed.
yeah, yeah. Let's talk a bit more about that getting better because being a data analyst, our job is to, but for me, that's focused on marketing data, writing data, on-chain data for marketing purposes. Getting better is a really, really big factor. And when I was listening to your Matrix DAO, you mentioned that one of the important things to do to becoming productive and becoming um building data that is meaningful, because I'm not gonna lie to you, my first dashboard, if somebody says they got checked it out, I'll be shy because they're not meaningful. Like when I look at them and I rerun the query again and I see the updated numbers, they're not meaningful. And then you're talking about that thing about what to do. The important things to do to be more productive is to look for ideas, in your own words, that validate what you already know, instead of looking for potential failure points and then trying to find a solution to these failure points within the data point. When you look at it from that perspective, on that idea, that suggestion that you gave, when data analysis is going to build any data that or dashboard that is meaningful, how does that really play out? Like in mental mode, like how do you bring yourself to a point where you want to, your idea is that I'm not looking for a pain point, because my default mode even to now is when I want to write data, I look at, okay, what's the pain point? So like what do I want to solve with this, right? How do you kind of like make that change in idea or understanding or mindset to be able to actually approach data that way? Or and if there's any example of a time you saw this play out in any of your works?
I'm very impressed that you guys managed to like find the space and like dig up stuff.
Yeah,
Frankly, I don't remember saying this.
really. It is. Yeah.
I think what I was trying to say is when you do an analysis, don't just focus on like the things that are obvious or like the things that you already know, but also focus on things that are like, why is there a sudden spike in my graph? And then sort of dig deeper on those. Maybe also here I was trying to say like test your assumptions. So when you write a query, essentially you're making assumptions about the data, right? When you add filters, you're assuming the data exists under so and so conditions and
Right.
that those are true for what you want to find. And maybe instead of just copy pasting your queries that you've done before with the same thing, why not just pause and sort of like reflect on whether or not these filters that you're using are they actually true? Like, could there be a situation where it is false?
Mhm.
I think a very common mistake is like when I see people filtering for DEX swaps, they use like the origin function signature. That's not inclusive of every swap. So depending on your goal, if your goal is to get all swaps, then that's very wrong. But yeah, those sort of things, I think people need to like take a look at their query again, assume everything is potentially wrong, and then sort of test those assumptions. I think that way you would also be better at seeing on-chain data rather than just assuming that what you've done in the past is correct and just copy paste the whole time.
I think that's very. I think that's something I'm gonna do with the last dashboard I worked on. Yeah, I worked on a protocol called Falcon Finance on Ethereum. Yeah, looked at the liquid staking, looked at some of the events that they had. I'm gonna like test the data like you mentioned.
Yeah.
And I think it's a very, very like interesting way to really look at it, because you more or less look at failure points and how you can actually improve some of the things that you worked on.
Mm-hmm.
When you write a query, how many times do you go over that line of query before you kind of like get to a point where you know, okay, this is good to go?
Depends. So if it's a new protocol, and I have no idea how it works, I would first actually go through like um, a lot of example. So I just find through either on their website for documentation or on the Explorer, and just like look through all of their possible transactions, like what sort of data exists in traces, sort of data exists in events, what contracts do they have, right? Sort of get a very overview understanding of what's happening. Then sort of decide if the data is sort of straightforward than just use like events, right? But I spend a lot of time in this phase of seeing all types of transactions so that I have an understanding of like what filters to even start with.
Yeah. So you can kind of like you test everything first before you even
Yeah.
start with the fleet. Yeah. Yeah. But another problem that I've faced is, for example, when you're gonna go into writing a query for a protocol, you see a protocol, let's say you pick a protocol named Logi, like Logi protocol, for example, random example. You see it on X and it kind of like looks interesting. You check their dev documentation, and one of the things I've noticed which is very frustrating is the fact that many many protocols don't add their contract addresses into their documentations. It kind of like makes it very difficult to um have to make any initial query, and it kind of like forces you into a place where you need to go into Discord and start asking questions about, which is what I feel is very cringe. I just don't feel comfortable doing that. But you have to now go into the contract as asking questions around their contract addresses and whatnot. What are the, if you've experienced that challenge before, but what are the best ways to actually go around this? Many times when I experience it nowadays, I just don't bother. But previously, I would go through the stress of asking questions around smart contract and everything, which can be seem very. Sometimes they don't want to maybe have it public yet. Those kind of things. I don't know.
Yeah. I'm not sure if I have a video on this. I might have or a tweet. But the trick is to interact with the protocol, and when the MetaMask pops up, you don't have to click approve. And in that MetaMask pop-up, there is the contract address.
I'm gonna try this right now.
I mean, essentially what the MetaMask is doing is you are interacting with a function of the protocol, right? And so
Yeah,
what MetaMask is doing is that it is creating the call data to be submitted on chain. And so that call data has the contract address.
I'm on the protocol right now.
You're doing like a swap or something?
Yeah, more like it's a deposit thingy. Whoa, like I don't think I've seen anybody say that before.
Check my videos.
Interesting. I like that. I think that's very helpful, to be honest, because it can be very daunting to actually look for the contract addresses. So in the case, one of the things I found out, for example, for you remember we were teaching us in the classes of we were teaching us automated market making AMs, and
Oh, yeah.
we didn't like that. You remember we yeah. When I picked up Falcon Finance, I was like, I had to go watch the videos again for the training. One of the things I noticed with that particular protocol was that there were many contact addresses for many different things.
Yeah.
With what you just said now, in a case where, let's say, I don't have access to the contract address and I want to get the address for this particular function or that particular function, all I need to do is, let's say, if I want to get, let's say there's a separate addresses for their swapping votes and whatever, I just try to make a swap activity, and I can get the address. Or if I want to get the address, contact address for the add liquidity event, I simply need to try to add that liquidity, and I'll get a distinct contact address for that. Is that what you mean?
You mean like interacting with the protocol?
Yeah.
Yeah, but from my experience, once you've done it once and you sort of then click around on the Explorer, you can find the other contract addresses because they're sort of linked together.
They're usually linked together.
Or if it's not, then you get the deployer address and then you see
Oh
what they've
God.
deployed and
Yeah.
then go through the list.
Smart.
There's another trick. Click on users. You click on the address of users who interact with the protocol. It
Mhm.
goes through the list of history, and more often than not, you can see them interacting with other parts of the protocol.
Yeah, that's a trick. I think you taught that trick to us before. It's what I used to do when I'm looking for different activity within different events within the contract. It kind of like look at what people are doing. I say, okay, he added a liquidity here, so there's a liquidity event, and I get the hash whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've done that before. See, I think I agree with that. It's brilliant. Like it solves a lot of problem. I don't think we are there yet where we can easily just write where there's a public Etherscan where we get all the contract addresses for whatever protocols that we want. I think this guy from Dune, I don't know, trying to get it, I find it. There's a product, I think it's called Hedge. I don't know if I'm correct. Kind of like, yeah, he
You mean
no, it's interesting. I can find him. It's from Dune. Joe knows him very well. He kind of like built a product that allows you to just like type in a product, type in a protocol, and it gives you the contact addresses, explains what each of those addresses do, blah 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 blah. Kind of like makes it easy and simple
I
to
think
at
it's
least.
hurt.
Herd. HERD. Exactly. Head echo. Yeah.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
I think you need to plug in a contract address, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Because that's how it works.
Yeah. Andrew Wong. His name is back in my mind. Yeah, Andrew Wong. Yeah. That's quite interesting. I think it solves majority of the problem because sometimes data analysts can spend a lot of time just trying to get the contract addresses and understand what's really happening within the protocol. It's kind of like what the dev docs is there for, do, but it is what it is, to be honest. Looking at trying to understand how data kind of like functions within Web3 activity and within the space. I know that you're very outspoken on X about vanity metrics
Mm.
on dashboards, not social vanity metrics, just like I think the most popular one you talked about is that you don't like is the daily active users in the last 30 days. Yeah. And I watched one of your Sunday's video when they did a march and you were like on your post, you were like you think it can be tempting for brands to kind of like focus on that kind of metrics, especially when the numbers look good and bullish. For example, if the daily active users in the last days is like 700K, and you kind of like said it can be misleading. I was like, okay, you're like it can be misleading and it provides like little to no insight on what's really happening. When you look at it from that kind of perspective, how should brands kind of like approach these kinds of metrics? Like, is there another angle to how they can now start to think about talking about their user activity? Should they kind of like rather than saying daily active users in the last 30 days, should they kind of like put it into a segment or maybe into a cohort or something? How can it why is first of all why is it misleading and why does it provide little to no insight, and then what are the ways to which brands can kind of like approach this instead?
Yeah. So I think this ties nicely with the framework at the beginning
Okay.
of our podcast. So like if you just have metrics like daily active users, just think of it from the brand's perspective. Like, okay, we have this amount of users. Now what? What can I do with this number? It doesn't tell me anything if regards to like how does this help me make any decisions, right?
Mhm.
It's just a number. Compare that to something, let's say daily active users for a DEX. So daily active users that provide liquidity, right? So that itself, just
Sure.
by adding some scenario or some context, gives so much more insight. Or not even insight, but like just so much more context to the team. And this definition you can always just tweak as well. Like for example, maybe you define it as like users who provide at least X amount over the past, how many days and has not churned, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, just imagine how would that feel? How does the brand feel over that number as compared to a generic daily active users number? Which one would you think is better, right? And so that's why I think the vanity metrics, as in the word vanity, like daily active users, are still okay, but they need to have a scenario behind them. They need to have some context for them to be useful. If it's just a generic one for the whole protocol, then obviously not. And then the next thing I will say is that um, for metrics like this, you don't need it more than once. You do it once, the brand sees it, the brand acknowledges it, and then you move on to more useful metrics. If you keep doing the same thing, you literally are providing no value to the brand.
Kind of like doing daily I think I've seen some of the contents like um daily active users in the last 30 days for the month of August. So I've seen some analysts that kind of like, which I think was cool initially. They kind of like updates every month and says the next month they come back again say daily active users for the month of September. I think based on what you're saying, in the case where you add context to it, and you just kind of like do it once because the value that it provides is kind of like finite. If I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, like so blanket statements, a blanket metrics of like daily active users month over month is X and Y, right? That's good, but only once. It only works once. You cannot just keep spewing the same thing. Once you've got attention, you then move on to more helpful metrics like, okay, these are the users who are doing this sort of activity, and this is how I define users in the context of your protocol.
Let's talk about dashboards where analysts kind of like write a query, put out a dashboard without a methodology. Like in terms of standardization on how dashboards should kind of like look like. Are methodologies within the dashboards that explain the ideas on how they count, let's say, their segmentation and how they count a user from a bot and how they filter bots. Those kind of methodologies, are they very important on the dashboards, or they are something that are not necessarily very
I
important?
would say it's important, but maybe not put everything out there. So I've been seeing like a lot of dashboards read like a research paper. I mean that's fine, but like if you want to get attention, probably not the best way. I would say the definition and methodology helps the most when it is closest to the source where you apply it. So let's say you have a dashboard of like, 10 graphs and you put your methodology right at the top. No one's gonna like scroll to the top and then scroll back to the bottom to see, right? You're gonna want to provide that context where your graph actually is,
Yeah.
along with your insight. So maybe that's just a preference thing, but that's how I would feel the dashboards that are more useful.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Particularly when you added that context thing to it,
Mm.
on what kind of like changes the perception on what a daily active user is. You're saying, just kind of like hit me here when you just mentioned that you're saying people kind of like build dashboards like a research paper, and you're like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not kind of like, it's not somewhat helpful if you want to get attention. Why is that? Why is that the case? I would think the reverse is the case, where you put a lot of effort into, that the kind of like tab function on Flipside where you have multiple tabs. First tab is like a full
Yeah.
text
Yeah.
and the brand logo, and then the next tab by tab by tab, like just kind of like goes into different topics.
Yeah.
But you saying that it's not kind of like helpful if you want attention. Is that the case?
Well, when's the last time you read through everything on the dashboard that looks like that?
I can't remember.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly my point. If you want to get attention, that's probably not the best format. If you're already contracted, that means people will read your stuff because they paid for it. Then yes, by all means, make it as comprehensive as possible, insightful as possible, right? But if you're getting the initial attention, getting the initial value, I would just cut everything and like strip it down to like one or two graphs to show compelling insights that make the brands want to find out more or want to learn more from you and work with you.
That's interesting. I like that. And when I look at my experience, I'm just kind of like trim them back. I tend to always skip those texts, to be honest. I maybe read the intro about what the product is, but then the other ones I just scroll over. I agree.
Also, the audience of who the dashboard is intended for will be useful, right? I mean, it's useful to consider as well. Say like you are doing a dashboard to get the attention of a protocol. You put an intro there, it's stuff that they already know, so they're just gonna skip your dashboard entirely. Instead, if that's your audience, obviously you want things that are more eye-catchy, headlines that are intriguing but also gives value at the same time, and not just like clickbait titles.
Yeah.
So yeah, it really depends on your audience, but I just feel like most dashboards I see have no purpose, no purposeful audience in mind, and just built for the average or like which means in other words, you're building dashboard for no one to read because there's no target audience.
But what you just said just kind of like bring a lot of questions in my mind, because I write dashboards and I'm like, and I think case study in how I do dashboard is more like interest based. And like trying to bring out information to a certain community based on interest. What's the high level approach to actually putting up, arranging or making a dashboard that's for community members to understand what's happening within the protocol, versus making a dashboard for the protocol team in themselves to use internally, versus making a dashboard for VCs to kind of like understand what's happening within something like within the protocol.
I think you first need to understand what the needs are for all those audiences. Like for the protocol team itself, um, if they just did some event like a liquidity event, then obviously things related to that would be very insightful, right? For the community, I don't know, maybe highlight sort of whale activities, like all the big NFT purchases on the rare NFTs. That's always fun to read, right? So those, I think those are more community focused. VC ones, I'm not sure. You're probably closer to VCs than I am, so you probably know more needs.
I wish I am. I really wish I am, to be honest. But I do understand. It's kind of like understanding what they're looking for, and then just kind of like putting it up within the dashboard, make it answer their questions or their potential question,
Yeah,
or like kind of like build dashboards that anticipate questions that they'll probably want us for.
yeah.
Interesting. That's interesting. It is interesting. I think from a data perspective, it kind of like breaks down how we should kind of like think about dashboards and data analysis. I think from what you said is first of all mental phase first, like the mindset on knowing okay what would be helpful to the target audience you're trying to work on. Which in this case, if at all is not necessarily a a community centered dashboard, kind of like feel if many people like me like approach data creation in this kind of sense, like building dashboard and analysis in this kind of sense, it will kind of like find a way to be more helpful to people, and it will kind of like push that information or the movement we're trying to like push out there. That data is important. Yeah, I agree with that. And also your YouTube channel is a very big source as well. Let's talk about that. You put out a lot of. First of all, why don't you publish your YouTube videos on Twitter?
I need the more premium X for
You
that.
should, you should get it. Jeez.
Let me
Yeah,
see how much is it.
yeah, you should get it. I know
I mean,
many data friends like I, John, Muti, you your YouTube channel is like a big resource source section. If you want a question answered. I remember there was a time when Joel was trying to understand traces, went just bull washed everything. Same here as well. What was your inspiration for starting the SQL Sunday YouTube channel? What
mm,
prompted you to start that?
so I think Flipside used to have videos on its YouTube channel,
Hmm?
and then that don't I think that wasn't continued after a while. And so I like that teaching part in the videos, and so I just wanted to continue that. And I find myself doing things that I am interested in on Sundays.
Nice.
And I think before the video I was doing a lot of like threads, just analysis
Yeah.
in general, and thought, why not I just make it into a video and put it on YouTube. That's how it started.
That's really nice. Because it's kind of like turned out into one of the most valuable sources, especially when you want to understand flip side data or SQL data, pretty much in that kind of sense. Or just understand how blockchain data works, first of all, and tables and different functions and how to handle different issues. And by the way, if you're listening to this podcast, you should check out I'll put a link in the notes on the show. You should check out SQLs on the YouTube channel by Sam. It's a very, very interesting place to understand how data works. And hopefully, Sam, hopefully you can actually start publishing your videos on X as well. So we,
Hopefully, we'll
we
see.
don't have to go all the way to YouTube.
We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been an interesting conversation with you, Sam. I have one more question. Last question, to be honest. What's the one thing that you want listeners to kind of like take away from this conversation, like, based on everything we've talked about? Let's say from folks who are marketers, who are analysts, who are just like random folks who are interested in crypto. What's the one belief, one action that you wanted to take from this conversation that you know that they can probably implement into their data journey or into their protocol regarding data or anything centered around data, generally speaking?
So I think I wanna advise listeners who may be interested in data but have not tried it out yet, and maybe they feel done. Maybe they think to us.
Mm-hmm.
Just start exploring today, right? As simple so like starting at just get started really. I feel like it may seem like there are a lot of analysts already on this data journey, but to be honest, most of them are just very surface level, or don't get into the weeds of the data. And so the opportunity is there. If you're interested, just get started.
Also, thank you so much, Sam. Really, 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 really excited having you